When I came to Columbia University, when I came to SIPA, my first priority was to really expose the students to the field, expose the students to the UN, bring them there and build the synergy between the United Nations and SIPA. I worked close to 30 years at the United Nations, first in peacekeeping operations, and in the last 10 years being the right hand of the then Secretary General Kofi Annan. The day at the UN was part of this strategy, of this vision that the program should really bring the students to the UN and make them understand the complexity of a multilateral organization with 193 member states.
I had the unique opportunity to spend 2 days in the office of Stéphane Dujarric. He's the spokesperson for the Secretary General. They welcomed me and took me on as part of their team for those 2 days. I was able to join all their staff meetings and also helped write some of the talking points that went into the press briefing that day.
The main task of the Office of the Spokesman is to be the liaison between the press corps that's accredited to the UN, be their main point of contact with the United Nations, with the Secretariat. The other main task is to either have myself or one of my colleagues always be with the Secretary General to handle the media and public-facing events when he travels.
I think that this experience is really valuable for any SIPA student just because the UN is such a big part of international affairs. So no matter what kind of job you go into, whether you're focusing on economics or human rights, you have to know how the UN works and how the UN system fits into how things play out in the world. Hearing Stéphane read the talking points that I wrote was very satisfying because I could sit there and listen and say, hey, I wrote those and actually they sound pretty good.
UN seems to be such a complex organization. You hear about it and you want to learn more about it, but you don't know how to access it. I think this program gave me the opportunity to sit with people, to understand where they come from, what drives them, what passion do they have, and sort of understand how can I better align myself with those objectives.
The UN bureaucracy is not worse than any other bureaucracy, the private sector or governments. That's not to say the issues are not real, but the advice would be understand why things are the way they are. It's not because people are malicious or don't want to work or because things are just complicated. There's a reason why organizations function the way they do. And so when you see something that doesn't work so well, try to understand what's behind it. That by itself is a great learning opportunity.
Every time I would ask them about their work, they would get very passionate. That means that this bureaucracy which we imagine to have driven down everything is not really driven down anything. It's just a system with which people work and build consensus. To be able to live through that even for 1 day or 2 days is very good in formatting where I want to go with it.
I have been studying the United Nations for many years, and I knew very well the projects that UNICEF Innovation was involved with. They try to find new ways, using new technologies, to make life better for children all over the world. So I was very interested in seeing with my own eyes that kind of innovative work.
A great example of an innovation that came out of one of our country offices is called UReport. And UReport is a system that uses basic mobile phones and text messages to allow kids to communicate with each other and with governments. One of the ways that our team is able to facilitate these conversations and collaborations is by working with academia. One, it gets our staff to think differently about how we solve problems, and the world of the classroom and the educational space kind of gives you an ability to fail and to experiment and to research. Second, working with academia in general gives us an ability to build a generation of problem solvers that we can then hire.
Being there and seeing the work they do, all the prototypes, the robots, the people coming up with new technologies, for me it was amazing.
The way that I entered the United
The
Nations.
37 students come back and their hosts come. Depending where they go, they have very different stories to tell.
They knew what their mission was, and you could see it in all of the action.
As they were trying to move the UN convoy from their original
UN Women was definitely a breath of fresh air that I wasn't expecting.
I started with placing the students for 1 day. One of our hosts took them for 8 days.
Somebody obviously held the door for me one day to be part of the dream. It continues to be a dream, and I invite you to share that dream.
I remember when I first started working at the UN, my first few weeks I was completely overwhelmed by the acronyms that are used and the very sort of internal to UN language. When you first come, it seems very overwhelming, but once you're embedded in the process, you're able to see how it works very quickly.
By spending a day with the people that make up the United Nations, hopefully the students will come out with a better picture of the kind of people that we are, the kind of people we're looking for.
To get to see at the personal level, the way they work, where they come from, how they interact with each other, that's a unique opportunity.
The departments where they go out of their way to really make sure that those students would understand their work, would understand why it doesn't work sometimes, but the message they get very often is keep trying and believe that you can make a difference. And they come back with all this. Hopefully they do.